And you already know. You already know who my 1 and 2 are at this point. Obviously, Joker is my number 2. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is my number 2 linebacker in this draft. And I'm a bit biased, I will admit. I'm a Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan. And so he is a guy that I know all too well. I watched him in high school. He's from where I used to live in Hampton, Virginia. So I watched this kid in high school quite a bit. Hell, I even watched him when he played rec ball. I mean, I go way back with this kid. So I know all about his game, his skill set, and what he brings to the table. And I watched him at Notre Dame blossom from a guy that couldn't get on the field as a freshman and was redshirted to a guy that, you know, got on the field in limited spots as a redshirt freshman, really, and then explode on the scene as a redshirt sophomore and continued that as a redshirt junior. So let's take a look at JOK's card as we flip this thing over. And first thing that jumps out at you is his athleticism and speed. I don't need to explain this to you, but I will go into greater detail as we talk about his acceleration and explosiveness. This is a guy that just looks like he's moving at a different rate of speed than everybody else on the field. There are games where you watch him and it looks like everybody else is moving in slow motion because he's just moving at a different rate of speed. And they're just guys that you look at and you say, they're different. He's one of them. Where you just watch him and I'm just amazed at the entire package. So his agility and short area quickness through the roof, okay? He's got cornerback skills at linebacker. Think about that. Let that sink in. When you watch this guy in the slot, and we're not just talking, you know, tight ends. We're talking shifty slot receivers. I'm watching this guy cover 4-3 burners in the slot, and he's step for step knocking the ball away, right in the hip pocket on a slant. And when you're in the slot, it's way harder to cover in the slot than it is out wide, because I call it a 4-way go. Everybody calls it a 3-way go, but it's a 4-way go because that receiver can come back to the football, he can go up the field, he can go in, or he can go out. And you don't know what he's going to do, and you got to be able to react to all of it. And I'm watching this guy in the slot, and as a Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan, I watched it every Saturday. So I know what he is. But it just really took my breath away watching this guy cover some of these shifty receivers and not give any ground. And it's that agility, it's the short area quickness, it's the explosiveness. Again, closing speed and explosiveness are two different things. When you got closing speed, you can close the distance. You're a guy that can move. It's great acceleration. Explosiveness is different. It just looks different. It pops. You see it and you know when you see it. That's what he has. Physicality, and he can shed and slip. So, look, he's not a big guy. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But he's not afraid to mix it up, man. You know, I always reveled in his ability to just be physical with dudes. You know, offensive linemen, tight ends, fullbacks, you name it. He was mixing it up with the best of them. And he'd get his ass whooped his fair share of the time, and he'd win his fair share of the battles. But one thing you couldn't match was his quickness. So if he had an angle or he beat you to the spot, there was nothing you could do about it. So I think that this is a guy that, to me, displays and exhibits a lot more physicality than I was expecting when it comes to these, that kind of size and frame that he has. And then his ability to just find the football, to slip, to shed, to just find a way to the ball, it's uncanny. Plays under control. Normally when you get a guy with his skill set that moves at the rate of speed that he moves at, you find yourself with a guy that can get out of control at times. It never seems like he's out of control. And obviously, I'm using the word and phrase never loosely because obviously there are going to be times where he comes screaming downhill like a banshee out of hell, and a guy's just going to simply stick his foot in the ground, and he may get a piece of him, but he doesn't get him onto the ground. But that's rare, man. Like, he generally plays under control, breaks down, makes form tackles. I mean, coming like a bullet and then boom, And there's some times where he doesn't make the tackle, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But he's a guy that plays for as fast as he moves, he plays under control. He's a sound tackler. Look, he's gonna miss some tackles here and there. Everybody does, but for the most part, he generally gets people on the ground. That was never a complaint from me or any other Irish fan watching this guy play. Is that, oh man, he misses too many tackles. Versatility and coverage ability is what makes him who he is. It's the reason he's going to be selected in the first, probably more likely than not, 17 picks of this draft. If I had to guess, I wouldn't be shocked if he went in the top 15. It's a unique skill set that few can match. And again, I talked about this already when we talked about Jabril Cox and his ability to cover in the slot. It is one of the biggest deficient areas of NFL defenses in today's NFL is covering receivers in the slot, whether it's a tight end that's flexed and detached from the core, whether it's a shifty slot receiver, whether that guy is the Buccaneers slot receiver, Chris Godwin. And again, I talked about these slot receivers getting bigger and bigger, or they're sticking Devontae Adams in the slot, trying to get a mismatch. You have to be able to find guys that can cover in the slot. And when we start talking about guys that can cover in the slot, your defense can't be complete if you don't have a true slot defender. He gives you that. And we saw what a Travis Kelce or Darren Waller can do to an NFL defense. We saw it time and time again last year, where you don't have an answer for what that tight end brings to the table. Bill Belichick has made a living taking away tight ends. When he can't do that, when Patrick Chung isn't available, or Aqib Talib or Stephon Gilmore, he doesn't have one of those elite guys that he can just say, take this guy out of the game. He struggles. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is one of those types of elite players and athletes that you can take him and say, I need you to reduce his impact on this game, and he can do it. And that kind of commodity, whether you think he can be on the field in short yardage situations, or you don't know if you want him on the field when a team is in 4-minute offense, all of that good jazz, all relevant questions and concerns. You bypass all of that because of that trait and that one characteristic I just brought to the table, which is he can shut down the slot. And in today's NFL, where the slot is becoming more and more of an impactful part of the game and position, you better have one of these types of guys or somebody like it. Versatility, coverage ability, I just talked about that. Blitzer, playmaker. This is a guy that I talked about. If I'm going to select you, you better be a playmaker. You better be a guy that's around the football, that's causing havoc, creating opportunities for the defense. That's what he does. Whether he is in the slot, whether he is a blitzer off the edge, You don't know where he's going to line up. He's a chess piece. He's a Swiss Army knife. He's on the left side. He's on the right side. Generally he's on the weak side of the defense. But you don't know where he's going to line up. He's a guy that you can play around with, put him in different spots. You can line him up over the slot, and then he can blitz. I can't tell you how effective he was back in 2019 as a slot blitzer. He's covering the slot. You don't account for him. He comes scot-free off the edge, 110 miles an hour. Quarterback sees him too late. He's sacked. Can't tell you how many times that happened. How about the Clemson game this year? He's in the backfield. It's a toss, guys. It's a toss. He's already 3 yards in the backfield. And the reason that Travis Etienne muffs the toss is because he looks and he sees a flash of color. Like, what is this guy doing back here already? He bobbles it right to JOK, and he takes off for a touchdown. He's a playmaker, man. Durability and motor. Again, not something that we ever had to discuss at his time at Notre Dame. He was always on the field. He was always available. And then motor always ran hot. Always. Weaknesses. His size. He's a tweener. I mean, what else? What more can I say? He's a tweener. Remember when the phrase tweener carried such a negative connotation that it was a death sentence? Like, you definitely weren't a first-round pick if you were a tweener. Those days are over. With the advent of the new age tight end and the slot receiver being such a big, integral part of NFL offenses, teams welcome tweeners if you have an elite trait like this guy does. So it's a weakness. He's still 217 pounds or whatever. He's still, a smaller guy, but teams are I mean, I remember the Chargers 3 years ago. In the box, they might have had 3 defensive linemen, and everybody else on the field was probably 230 to 215 pounds. Every other player, from the corners to the linebacker. There wasn't a big linebacker on the field. All of their guys were just these chess pieces that they could move around. And you're seeing the NFL not necessarily go to an NBA style of positionless players, but you're seeing more of that than ever before. So a tweener doesn't hurt you as much because there's no true 5 if we're going with an NBA analogy. There's no true 5 on the court. So it doesn't matter that you don't really have a real center on your roster. It's not really going to hurt you. You could get away with him being on the football field. Liability in the run game at times. Again, he's 216, man. Like, even if he bulks up a bit and gets to 223, he's still 223 pounds. Is that going to deter you from putting him on the field? I talked about, the Colts and their situation with their linebacker, Darius Leonard, and he was playing at 215 last year. Again, if he didn't tell you, you wouldn't have known, and nobody else was stopping him at 215. So if you want to get to the ball, it's a mentality, just like rebounding in the NBA. If you want it, you can get it. And he wants to get to the football. But he's a liability. He's small. So he's going to get gobbled up at times in the run game. He will slide off of tackles from time to time. That was one of my pet peeves with him at Notre Dame is he come flying in, he'd jump on a guy, and then like he was on a stripper pole, he would just slide down. And eventually that guy would just take his leg out of that tackle and keep running. You'd be like, come on, man, make the tackle. You did all of that to get there and make this tremendous play, and then you missed the tackle. So he'll slide off of tackles from time to time. Can he be a 3-down player? That's a question for somebody else to answer. I can tell you this. I had no problems with him being a 3-down player at Notre Dame, but that's college football. And the NFL is a different animal. You're not drafting him because of his run defense. So, it's definitely a question to be had. But I think he's going to be on the field all 3 downs, personally, myself. But he's a top 20 pick for me. I think he's going to go. I feel really confident that he's going to go in the top 20 picks unless something crazy happens. We've been hearing all this chatter about 5 quarterbacks potentially going in the top 12 picks. That's a little aggressive for me. But if something like that were to occur, and then we see, 5 offensive linemen, because there's some really good guards in this draft too, go, and then you see 2 corners go, and then you see 3 or 4 receivers, then that could push a guy like this back a bit. I think he's going in the top 20 picks. And my comp for him is Durham James. I remember when Durham James came out, and Durham James was more of a pure safety when he came out. But I remember everybody talking about this guy because he was this hybrid defender. Where do you play him? Is he a safety? Could you play him at linebacker? And you really didn't know what to do with Durham James. You just knew he's an athlete. We got to get him on the field somewhere. Durham James ended up being more of a safety, but you could drop him over the slot. He had no problems playing there. You could drop him into the box. He had no problems being a problem there. He could blitz. I see a lot of Durham James in him, just a guy that you can move around. The Chargers did a tremendous job with him when he was healthy, just moving Durham James around, just not knowing where the hell he was going to line up. And, I also thought of another guy, but I just think his coverage ability is a little bit more exceptional than Telvin Smith. But I remember when Telvin Smith was coming out of Florida State, and he was 215. I'm like, what the hell do you do? And that was before we got to this day and age where, the tight end was so prevalent and the slot was such a big deal. And that was right around the time when the Cardinals was experimenting with Dion Buchanan, and we didn't do 215-pound linebackers at that point. And I remember Telvin Smith coming in, and I'm like, well, he's an athlete, but I don't really know what to do with him. He had ability, but he didn't have the coverage ability. He could drop into coverage, and he had great movement skills, but he wasn't like JOK. He wasn't covering dudes in the slot like this. He wasn't running like he was a corner. So I think he's more Durham James than he is Telvin Smith. But I can tell you this much. He's a difference maker. And whoever gets him is getting themselves a hell of a football player. That is for sure.
LouieTeeNetwork.